Hi, this is Dave. If you're going to build a successful Christian business, there's two things you have to do. Number one, you have to build a successful business. And number two, you got to build into it Christian business practices. So in order to be excellent, you have to be excellent at both sides. And because of my background in the world of sales, for 30 years I have personally and contractually worked with over 500 different sales organizations. I've got some expertise in the world of sales. That's what we're going to focus on today, helping you build the excellent business through some pretty sophisticated measurements. These are measurements that have sort of evolved over my 30 years of sales consulting. And they will make, if you use them and apply them and then use the information you're going to get from them, it will allow you to transform your sales force and your sales system. So hang with me here. Over my career as a sales expert, I've personally and contractually worked with over 500 different sales organizations. And in that time, I've learned some things. Here's one. Very few chief sales officers have a good handle on the economics of the sales force, and very few entrepreneurs think about the economics of a sales system. So we're going to take care of those two issues right now. Almost everyone can tell you what the amounts of the various categories on a P&L statement indicate. So things like sales salaries, expenses, advertising costs, etc. are readily at hand. However, very few decision makers dig deeper. And that means that significant information is never uncovered and decisions are made on the basis of superficial and often flawed information. If you make decisions about your sales force or if you manage your sales system, you will need a deeper understanding of the economics of sales efforts to make wise decisions going forward. So I'm going to share with you some measurements that will help you make better decisions than you probably are not using right now. So the first is something we call Kale's calculation. Now, this only a handful of sales leaders understand the concept of sales productivity. One way to define productivity is to compare the cost of a unit of labor versus the output. That's the classic sort of definition of productivity. It's an important measurement for every other job title. For example, an order entry clerk who inputs 100 lines an hour is more productive than one who inputs 80 lines, at least on the surface. If, however, your first clerk, let's say clerk A, 100-line clerk, costs you $50 an hour, and clerk B costs you $25 an hour, then the equation changes dramatically. Now, by driving down a bit deeper, we can discover that clerk A costs you 50 cents per line, while clerk B costs you 31 cents a line. So in business, productivity is measured by the output per dollar of cost. Okay? Now, when we apply that to sales forces, it takes the form of something we call Kale's calculation of sales productivity. This is a formula that I created decades ago to measure sales productivity. And by the way, we have this whole thing written up in an ebook with spreadsheets and so on. And I'll put a link in the show notes to get a free copy of the ebook on Kale's calculation. Okay, basically, we compare all the direct costs of a salesperson, and that would be things like wages, fringes, expenses, etc., to the gross profit produced by that person in that same period of time. So cost to gross profit produced. Having arrived at those two numbers, we then divide the total gross profit into the total cost. So the bigger number, hopefully the bigger number, gross profit is divided into the total cost. So the result is going to be a percentage. And that percentage is a measurement of the productivity of a salesperson. Here's an example. Salesperson, let's call Susan, produced a total gross profit in her territory of $560,000 last year. She cost the company $102,000. So her productivity measurement is 18.2%. Now you can follow all that and work it out to test it. Now that you have that measurement, the percentage, you can use that information to inform your management decisions in a number of ways. First of all, you can compare the Kale's calculation number, the percentage, to a set of benchmarks we've created over the years. So for a B2B salesperson, the acceptable range is under 20%, specifically 13 to 19%. So a salesperson who costs you 25%, for example, is probably not profitable. Oh, do you see how valuable this can be now? Now you got a more sophisticated, more accurate measurement of someone's productivity. Regardless of how much gross profit he or she produces, the ratio of cost to gross profit just does not allow enough to pay all the other costs of running the business and producing a profit. So this gives you a more accurate and specific measurement that allow you to make informed decisions about individual salespeople, so you can work with individual salespeople to improve their productivity. So that's one way you can use it. Here's another way to use Kale's calculation. You can use it to compare one sales team with another. So you can modify the measurement a bit, and again, in the ebook, we'll show you how, and create a measurement of the productivity of a sales team. And then you can compare one team with another to discover best practices and to make changes. This is particularly helpful to compare one branch to another, for example, or to more closely analyze a specialist sales team. And here's one other way. You can modify the number a bit and measure the productivity of the entire sales and marketing system for a company. Now, our benchmarks indicate that the acceptable range for a company is 26 to 34%. Now, that is if you're under, roughly 20 million in annual sales. And if you're larger than that, that number, 26 to 34%, can be incrementally smaller as the size of the business increases. So if your Kale's calculation at the system level or the total company level is, let's say, 40%, for example, that tells me a great deal about how effective your sales system is. You're not as productive, you're not as profitable as you could be because your sales system is not efficient. On the other end of the spectrum, if your Kale's calculation at the corporate level is too low, say 18%, that tells me you're probably not growing as rapidly as you should because you're not investing adequately in the sales function. Are you following me here? Okay. Discrepancies at the corporate level are generally due to sales systems issues rather than personnel issues. Your compensation plan is flawed, or your system of account responsibilities is ineffective, or you're calling on the wrong markets, or using the wrong sales approach, and so on. So, Kale's calculation will give you a deeper, more clear, more accurate look at the productivity of a salesperson, a sales team, and your company as a whole. Incredibly, when I get involved with a company on a consulting basis, it's the first thing I look at, and it tells me so much about the effectiveness of your sales approach. But that's just one. Here, we got a couple other measurements we want to share with you. Here's another one: productivity of a sales call. Okay, so first, if you have done Kale's calculation, you can determine the productivity of a salesperson. Now, with just a little thinking, we can ferret out some numbers that will tell us a great deal more about the situation by using them to discern the quality of a sales call. Now, let's think about the potential productivity of a sales call. It's just a simple measurement of the total cost of the sales call compared to the total gross profit produced by that call. So to create the total cost of a sales call, we take the salesperson's direct cost, the same thing we did for Kale's calculation, and then divide that by the number of sales calls made by that person in that period of time. So while the number varies greatly depending on the industry, the last numbers I've seen indicate that it's probably going to be somewhere between $125 and $300 per call for a business-to-business sales call. Finding that number is often an eye-opener for sales leaders. But more important than the cost of the sales call, which is, okay, that's the first thing you have to calculate. What is the average cost of a sales call? So what you get that, it's the potential productivity of the call is next. While potential is a slippery number to acquire, we can create some standards to help us make good decisions. For example, keep in mind from earlier in a podcast that a field salesperson should cost the company no more than 20% of the gross profit. So the ratio of cost to profit is 1 to 5. Are you with me? So if we impose that on a sales call, and we know that the call costs us $200, then what gross profit must that sales call produce if you're going to be within our benchmarks? Well, $200 in cost, the 5-to-1 ratio, that means that for every $200 sales call, that call must produce $1,000 in gross profit. Now, at this point, I suspect the blood is draining from the faces of most sales leaders and salespeople who are listening to this. OMG, some of you are thinking, we're spending a lot of time on customers and calls that aren't worth it. That's right, you are. One of the biggest flaws in the design of most sales forces is to allow the salesperson to waste time on accounts that will never be profitable. It's almost a universal malady. And again, when I get involved as a consultant with a B2B sales force, I mean, that's one of the first things we look at. And honestly, one of the first things we do is take accounts away from the salespeople. You can use this set of economics to focus the investment of sales time on profitable accounts. That can make a transformational difference in the effectiveness of a sales force and a sales system. For an example, an account with $10,000 in potential gross profit may only be worth 1 or 2 field sales calls, right? While an account with $4 million in potential gross profit, you could see them every week. So while there are lots of potential responses to these numbers, it does bring us to one of the rules of 21st century sales system design, and that is you should match the sales system to the dynamics and potential of the account. For example, it may cost you $1,000 to have a salesperson call on a low-volume account. However, you can cut that investment dramatically by creating a sales system of 5 to 6 proactive outbound sales calls by an inside salesperson, coupled with a couple of attractive product descriptions. Your attention should not be directed to the small end of the spectrum, however. On the other end of the spectrum, you're probably not investing sufficiently in the highest potential accounts. Now, if the potential is significant, then having just an outside salesperson calling them is insufficient. Remember the refrain, you match the sales system to the dynamics and potential of the account. So an account with huge potential ought to be invested in more heavily. Sales calls by executives and managers, significant entertaining events, company visits, and so on, they should all be part of the process for investing in high potential accounts. Okay, one more. We're not quite done. Here's one more measurement, something I call QPC. Stands for Quantified Purchasing Capacity. QPC is the answer to this question. Quote, if this account bought everything they could from me in the next 12 months, how much would that be? So lots of people think in terms of an account's potential, but often these ideas are vague and imprecise. Oh yeah, it's pretty big. Because this measurement is based upon a specific set of criteria, it provides a quantifiable measurement that can be used to compare one account with another, to determine sales, investment, and to measure penetration of an account. This is one of my pet peeves. You know, when we think about collecting information about a potential customer, once we get beyond the demographics, we have the potential customer's name, address, type of business, etc. Once we get that, then what would be the most important piece of information we should collect about every prospect and every customer? Would it not be how much can they buy? Or in other words, would it not be QPC? if we're collecting information about a prospect, once we have the demographics, what then is the most important next piece of information? And I'm going to recommend QPC. And yet, listen to this. In over 500 sales organizations that I have worked with, only one had an understanding of QPC and a requirement that salespeople collect it and a space on their CRM customer master screen to input it. So in other words, 1 in 500 understood it and used it, QPC. This measurement is so incredibly powerful that it can touch multiple sales issues. For example, just collecting the number and attaching it to an account can be powerful all by itself, even if you never do anything with it. When the average salesperson sees a verifiable measurement of an account's potential, that number is almost always larger than the salesperson had anticipated. The actual potential in a customer can motivate a salesperson all by itself. In addition, you can use that number to determine one half of our rule. Remember the rule, match the sales system to the dynamics and potential of the account. Okay, QPC goes a long way to determining the potential of that account. You can't precisely create and match a sales approach unless you know the QPC. It also takes the measurement of penetration into the 21st century. Now, it's no longer a matter of, a quote, I think we're going to get X percentage of the business, end quote. It's an objective measurement. If the account had $1 million of potential purchases and you're getting 50,000, your penetration is pretty low. One more thing. This podcast presents some of the basic sales system measurements. While most sales leaders don't dive this deeply into the economics of the sales force and the sales system, these few simple measurements can be used to transform a sales system and provide a figurative shot of adrenaline to a sales force. Think of it as economics of a sales system 101. Okay? Let me again encourage you to go get the ebook, Hale's Calculation ebook, and get started in creating more accurate, more telling economic measurements of the sales and sales system and salespeople. Hey, one more thing. The thought has occurred to me that this is pretty deep stuff today, and it's hard to grasp it all by listening to it. If you want to read it, I've got a number of articles on sales productivity, sales systems, and so on my blog. So I'm going to recommend that you go to my website, davekale.com, hit the button for blog, and then search for this particular podcast we've turned into a blog post with the title Maximizing Sales Efficiency, Key Economic Metrics Every Leader Should Know. That's the title of a blog post. But there's a bunch of stuff. I mean, sales systems is one of my key issues. So I got bunches of stuff. If you want to dig into it and read it rather than just listen to it, go to davekale.com, hit the blog button, and then search for sales systems and sales productivity and so on. Okay? That's it. We're done. Bye-bye.